So Democrats aren't automatically regaining popularity in spite of Donald Trump's increasing unpopularity. They're not able to benefit on Donald Trump's net approval rating going down. In fact, a Wall Street Journal poll found that the Democratic Party is at its lowest point in 35 years, meaning that their success in 2026 will hinge on them getting those numbers up. And if the last election, as well as Zohran Mamdani's victory, taught us anything, it's that you can't just be against Donald Trump. You have to be for something to win elections. But that's not all. You also have to pass a very basic moral litmus test. You have to oppose the mass slaughter of innocent human beings. Now, it sounds easy on paper, but in practice, it's apparently very difficult for some Democrats. To show you what I mean, an IMEU poll found that Kamala Harris's unwavering support for Israel in 2024 might have actually cost her the election, seeing that 29% of 2020 Biden voters who didn't vote for Harris in 2024 say that ending Israel's violence in Gaza was their number one issue. Fast forward to 2025, and a new IMEU poll with data for progress finds that Mamdani's support for Palestinian human rights supercharged his campaign and propelled him to victory, with 62% of voters saying that his support for Palestinian human rights was important to them and even swayed their votes. And when you break down policy preferences vis-a-vis Israel, the overwhelming majority of Democratic Party primary voters in New York City, at 79%, want to restrict weapons to Israel. This holds true across all demographics and is particularly important to non-voters who Democrats have struggled to recapture. Moreover, 78% of Democrats think that Israel is committing a genocide, and 63% want the next mayor to enforce the ICC's arrest warrant of Benjamin Netanyahu. So this in part explains why Democrats are so unpopular currently, because they are completely out of step with their own base on this significant issue, and their refusal to stop supporting Israel's genocide of Palestinians is tearing the party apart. Even though the overwhelming majority of the Democratic base views this as a genocide, well, as Detail reports, just 9 Democrats have described it as a genocide, and 1 Republican, and the only Republican is Marjorie Taylor Greene. Now, notably absent are any Democratic senators, including Bernie Sanders and Jeff Merkley. And I've got to say, it is painful to see Marjorie Taylor Greene, of all people, call this a genocide before Bernie Sanders. Nonetheless, here we are. But worse, even though the overwhelming majority of the Democratic Party's base wants to cut off weapons to Israel, every elected Democrat, with a few exceptions, has done the opposite. Like, they voted again and again to give them more weapons. And Democratic leaders like Hakeem Jeffries and Chuck Schumer have publicly attended anti-Palestinian hate rallies where they held hands with evangelical fascists and declared their unwavering support for a country committing a genocide. This is why the Democratic Party is so unpopular. It's not just that they're out of touch with their own base. That would be bad in and of itself. It's that they are defiant in the face of something that their base desperately wants. They've defiantly taken a position that is morally indefensible, which contradicts their purported support for justice, human rights, and human dignity. This one issue has destroyed their reputation. Their support and complicity with Israel's genocide is deeply, deeply offensive, even to liberals like the Pod Save America bros, who agree that Democrats have to cut weapons to Israel going forward. And these aren't your average purity testing leftists. These are establishment liberals who realize that the Democratic Party's current position is politically untenable. I'd go as far as to say that it's a non-starter in 2028, assuming that we have free and fair elections. But Democrats would probably argue that, they have to support Israel because even though the party doesn't like Israel anymore, well, they've got to appeal to independents and moderates. And to that, I'd say, no, the fuck you don't. Keeping your base satisfied is priority number 1. Democrats lose elections when they lose their own base. Had Kamala Harris committed to cut off weapons to Israel, she may very well be president right now. You have to serve your own base. That is politics 101. You can't just assume that they're going to turn out to vote for you, because both Kamala Harris and Hillary Clinton demonstrated that that is not the case. If there's anything you can learn from Republicans, it's that you have to serve your base. But more importantly, it's just not true that you have to support Israel to appeal to independence, because the entire country is shifting on this issue, not just Democratic Party voters. CNN's data analyst is going to look at the change in public opinion on this issue and the approval of Netanyahu in particular particular, and you're going to see that we have reached a point where support for Israel is officially a political liability.
Look at where he is today, minus 23 points. My goodness gracious. You look at those under the age of 35, his net favorable rating at this point, get this, 53 points underwater. My God. And this, of course, has everything to do with Israel's actions in Gaza, the American people at this particular point not exactly liking what they're seeing, and they believe that Benjamin Netanyahu is in large part responsible.
So to that point, how do Americans feel about Israel's actions in Gaza right now?
Yeah, so let's take a look at this. I mean, net approval of Israel's military acts in Gaza. You go back to November of 2023, it was on the positive side of the ledger, plus 5 points. I bet if you even go back a little bit further, it'd be a little bit higher, but Gallup only measured in November of 2023 at plus 5 points. Look at here where we are in July of 2025. Way down there at minus 28 points. Among those under the age of 35, get this, a negative 73-point net approval rating. This is all being led. All the negative opinions towards Israel and their acts in Gaza are being led by the younger folks in the electorate. Negative 73 points on the net approval rating. You rarely ever see numbers that low, and that is charging up this number, 28 points underwater. For the longest period of time, Americans have sympathized more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. That's still the case, but it's only by plus 5. You go back to May of 2024, it was plus 17. Right after October 7th, look at this, it was plus 48. In 2017, it was plus 39 points. That is a dramatic drop. That is, what is that, a 43-point drop since the aftermath of October 7th. And again, under the age of 50, you look at those younger voters, it was plus 38 Israelis back, all the way back in 2017. You look now, it is plus 19 Palestinians. There has simply put been a complete change of opinion on this topic.
So suffice to say, the political landscape has changed drastically in this country on this issue. You simply cannot win over young people who are the future of this country, who you need to be relevant if you are going to support Israel's genocide of Palestine. But keep in mind, that's just voters across the board that he was looking at. If you zero in on Democratic Party voters just in general, it is clear that the broader Democratic Party coalition agrees with the sentiment being expressed by voters in New York City. And Harry Enten explains just how significant the shift has been within the Democratic Party in a really short period of time.
Who Democrats sympathize more with, Israelis or Palestinians? In 2017, the Democratic Party was a pro-Israeli party. Look at this. They sympathized with the Israelis by 13 points, more with the Israelis than the Palestinians. But look at this sea change. Now Democrats sympathize more with the Palestinians by 43 points. Oh, my God. That is a change in the margin of 56 points over the course of just 8 years. So all of a sudden, it's the pro-Palestinian position that actually reigns supreme in democratic politics, not the Israeli position. And that is part of the reason why Mandani was able to do so well in this primary, because those attacks over Israel, simply put, did not ring true for Democrats. They're now on the side of the Palestinians, not the Israelis. Who age 18 to 49 Democrats sympathize more with, the Israelis or the Palestinians? Again, in 2017, younger Democrats sympathized more with the Israelis by 14 points. Look at this shift now. Palestinians, they sympathize more with the Palestinians by 57 points. That is an over 70-point shift in the margin in just a matter of 8 years.
And as bad as these numbers are now, I wouldn't be surprised if they got even worse for Israel, because you can't unsee what they did in Gaza. Children are literally starving to death as we speak. Starving Palestinians are being gunned down while they wait for food. Israel has bombed schools and mosques and churches and hospitals and cultural centers and refugee camps and residential buildings. They've slaughtered journalists. They've targeted and assassinated political opponents who have criticized them online, like the poet Rafat Al-Arir. I'll say it again, none of us will be able to unsee what's happening to these people. It is a genocide, full stop, that is being funded with our tax dollars, and Americans do not want to be complicit with this. And the Democratic Party crossed a moral line with the base by supporting this genocide unconditionally, and it destroyed what's left of the party, which is basically a corporate husk of its former self. But Zohran Mamdani has thrown them a life vest. He's created a blueprint to help them win elections going forward and recapture the base that they've lost. Yes, he's charismatic, but that wasn't what pushed him over the edge. It was his policies primarily that secured his victory. And if you go back to the first graph that we looked at the beginning from that Data for Progress poll, the top 3 issues that swayed people's votes were his plans to lower costs, his plan to tax the wealthy and corporations, and his support for Palestinian human rights. That right there is their ticket to victory, and it's what people like myself have been screaming about on the show for more than 10 years now. If Democrats simply propose bold, transformative policies like Medicare for all, free college, and if they were more antagonistic towards elites instead of suckling on their teats, and if they stopped supporting a literal genocide, they wouldn't just regain their popularity. I'd argue that they would be fucking unstoppable. If every single Democrat right now got on board with cutting off weapons to Israel and supported Medicare for all and taxing the rich to fund social programs like free college, free daycare, and whatnot, they would clobber the Republican Party. And it would be a party that we would all be proud of. But instead, they're willing to risk perpetual irrelevance by continuously ignoring the wishes of their base. I mean, just to give you an example of how toxic their brand has become, CNN did a profile of Andrew Cuomo titled, "Andrew Gets Out on the Streets of New York as He Tries to Take City Hall," and they write, "The reception was mostly warm besides an occasional detractor, including a man who pulled Cuomo in for a handshake, took out his phone for a selfie, and as the former 3-term governor of New York smiled for the camera, told him, 'I can't wait to watch you lose again.' Cuomo was unfazed." And this, my friends, is the modern Democratic Party in a nutshell. It's not just that the voters hate them, it's that they know they're hated, but remain defiant in spite of the disdain that their own base has for them because they think that they know better than the people who are electing them. Now, with regard to Andrew Cuomo, he's doubling down on his strategy of painting Mamdani as anti-Israel and anti-Semitic, and he doesn't realize that by doing that, he is effectively campaigning for Mamdani. But that's the thing about Democrats, right? No matter how obvious the conclusion is about Mamdani's win, they refuse to learn the correct lesson. And with regard to Cuomo, I'm glad that he's learning the wrong lessons. But for other Democrats, the takeaway should be pretty obvious, but it's not. For example, listen to how Pete Buttigieg characterized Mamdani's success in an interview with NPR. This right here is maddening.
I think a lot of people are focused on the leftism, the ideological leftism, that I think we shouldn't be so surprised that prevailed in a New York Democratic Party primary. But I think if my party wants to learn lessons from Mamdani's success that are portable to a place like Michigan, where I live, it's less about the ideology and more about the message discipline of focusing on what people care about and the tactical wisdom of getting out there and talking to everybody.
You see what I mean? They refuse to learn. They are being purposefully obtuse. The opposite of what he said is true. It is more about the ideology than anything. Messaging discipline is important. Talking to people is important, obviously, but the Democratic Party's lack of an ideology has hollowed out this party. Nobody knows what they stand for, including them. They describe it as a big tent, which apparently includes moderate Republicans and anti-Trump Republicans, but leftists like Zohran Mamdani aren't welcomed in that tent, as evidenced by the fact that the Democratic Party's leadership has refused to endorse Mamdani. And as rehearsed and poll-driven and focus group tested as modern Democrats are, one would think that they'd be as sensitive to the wishes of their own base, but they seemingly couldn't care less despite knowing what they want, and there's just no getting through to them, no matter how emphatically you press your fucking case. It's frustrating. For example, a couple of months ago, we talked about an interview that Jon Stewart had with Hakeem Jeffries, where he was asked repeatedly about healthcare, and Jon Stewart tried his best to goad him into saying the words Medicare for all, but he refused to do it, and he claimed that Democrats didn't have a policy problem, they had a messaging problem. And Hakeem Jeffries, with a straight face, said that the Democratic Party had already delivered revolutionary change when it comes to healthcare, but they haven't done enough to tout the benefits of the Affordable Care Act. Right, but we have the Affordable Care Act, and it's better than the pre-Obamacare days, but it's not good. The plans are unaffordable and shitty overall, and we want Medicare for all once and for all. But he refused to say what we wanted to hear, what he knew Jon Stewart wanted to hear. But getting back to the issue of Palestinian genocide, Kyrstal Ball of Breaking Points tried desperately to get Senator Slotkin to commit to cut off weapons to Israel, but she refused to budge no matter how hard Kyrstal made the case as to why she should do that, including appealing to her just on a human level as a mom.
Listen, I'm a YouTuber. You know, I have my words, that's all I have.
Yeah.
But you're a United States Senator. Like you're not the president, but you have power. So what are you going to do? Because so far what we've seen, I mean, you voted for some of the aid that's been used to massacre children and innocents. You have backed Israel, as far as I can tell, from your voting record at almost every turn. You voted for a definition of anti-Semitism that would, codify anti-Zionism as anti-Semitism. You voted as a member of the House to sanction the ICC for indicting Benjamin Netanyahu, who you just admitted is a war criminal, by your own words. So are you going to join Senator Angus King, Senator Bernie Sanders in saying no more aid to this country that is committing war crimes against innocent civilians?
I think the first thing, if you're asking about what to do with power, and I would offer that right now Democrats own nothing in Washington. So
don't play powerless with me. You're a United States senator. There are things you can do.
In terms of who runs our foreign policy, I just think it's interesting, right, that there was a ton of protests when Democrats were in charge.
There was a protest in Manhattan yesterday.
Okay. I think it's fair to say, just to be honest, that back and forth, like the number of protests that go on now versus before.
Well, they were part of your political coalition.
Well, not so much. I mean, Senator Slotkin.
That's fair.
Obviously, I'm here.
Yeah.
I was very upset over the Biden administration policy. And as you can tell, I'm very upset over the Trump administration policy.
Yeah.
So let's deal not in strawman, but me and
but
here
in
and
terms
now.
of so the tools that I have, the tools that we have in general, to me, the most important thing is a pressurized campaign to get aid into people who are starving. That to me is the number one, because that's the one is urgent and today. And that.
But will you cut off aid to Israel so long as they're committing crimes against humanity?
There is a difference between a weapon to protect a country from incoming missiles versus other type. Offensive and defensive weapons are different.
I feel really guilty that I'm not doing enough. I think all the time about, I'm a mom, I think all the time about those moms who can't feed their babies. Those babies are starving to death. And I just want to know, you're a United States Senator, you did vote for some of the bombs that were dropped on refugee camps. When kids have been sniped in the head, tents firebombed, people set on fire. The entire Gaza Strip turned into rubble. And now we're seeing these emaciated bodies of babies starving to death every day. And I
know what you can do.
Does it eat you up? Does it eat you up? Do you think, what more could I do? Do you regret any of your votes? Do you regret
let me tell
any
you what
sort
I
of
was working on this morning. A group of Jewish rabbis and Muslim community leaders came together with a proposal that we are working on just getting, if we can't get other aid in, at least get baby formula and nutritional supplements for children.
I mean, the Democratic Party is just hopeless. Kyrstal tried her best, and that was a phenomenal interview. I would encourage you to watch the whole thing. I'll link to that down below. But regardless of how hard she tried to appeal to Senator Slotkin, she just kept robotically sidestepping the question about her culpability and just, fixated on getting aid in, which doesn't make sense, because if you're going to fixate on aid, it begs the question, why did you continuously vote to arm and fund a country that refuses to let aid in? And why would you vote to sanction an international body who's trying to hold the war criminal who's denying aid to the people you want to give aid to accountable? It's politically inconsistent and downright morally egregious. And as bad as it was, if you watch the full thing, it gets even worse because they try again to get through to her, but there's just nothing. You cannot convince these people to deviate from their script. They won't listen. They know, by the way, that their support for genocide is politically untenable. And I say that because this picture of Democrats and Republicans with war criminal Benjamin Netanyahu was taken earlier this month. And if you look closely, you can see Cory Booker hiding behind his Republican colleague, Dave McCormick, because I think he knows that his continued support for a foreign war criminal could hurt his future presidential ambitions. And he was hiding his face because he knows this was going to piss off the base. And it's also contradictory, right? He gave that lengthy speech on the Senate floor about equality and justice, but yet here he is chumming it up with a war criminal. And by the way, he didn't say anything about Gaza in that lengthy speech, in that record-breaking speech. Not even a peep. So they know they look like phonies because they're supporting a genocide. They know that the base doesn't like this. And more importantly, and I want to emphasize this, they know it's wrong to support a genocide. It might not seem like they know because of how dumb they act, but I can assure you, they all know. They are making the choice to support this genocide despite its immorality. Sure, you can say that they're politicians, so they're subject to institutional pressure from lobbyists and the threat of an AIPAC-funded primary opponent if they deviate away from anything but full-throated support for Israel. But I mean, that's still a choice. I personally would choose to sacrifice my career if it meant that I didn't have to support genocide. But also, on top of that, if they were really concerned about this, party leadership can do things to insulate their members from the pro-Israel lobby, so that way they can be more in line with what their base wants. For example, they can require all members to sign a pledge disavowing campaign contributions from AIPAC, and if any candidate violates that, they don't get support from the DCCC. That is one thing that they can do to level the playing field, but they refuse to do that because they don't want to do that. So at the end of the day, it's not shocking to see that Democrats are so unpopular, even as bad as Donald Trump is, because I don't know who they expect to appeal to at this point. Yes, we can all acknowledge that Trump and the Republican Party has been a disaster. 17 million people are going to lose health care. Trump is starting wars with Iran. He is greenlighting ethnic cleansing in Gaza, but they can't, even despite Trump's immorality and disgustingness and fascism, cannot get it together and come up with a cohesive message to win back the voters that they lost. You know, they're clearly not going to be able to win over moderate Republicans. I think that Kamala's campaigning with Liz Cheney kind of disproved once and for all the efficacy of that strategy. But they're also not making any headway with their own base by distancing themselves from popular figures like Zohran Mamdani. So, I mean, the question is, what exactly do they think they're going to accomplish by simply being like anti-Trump exclusively and not having any policies? Who does this appeal to in particular? I mean, at this point in time, I can't not conclude that they're basically a dead party for all intents and purposes who serves exclusively as a protest vote against Republicans, and that's it, which is really sad. But listen, never ever forget that they are making the choice to remain this way. They are choosing to remain irrelevant. They would rather lose than adopt Zohran Mamdani's politics. And by now, it doesn't seem like there's any way to convince them to deviate away from this suicidal political strategy that they are glued to. So we have to force them out of the party, each and every single one of them, once and for all. Otherwise, things will never change and Republicans will continue to dominate because this party will remain so weak and ineffectual with the people who are keeping it down.